you never say maybe to a kid about a reward. If you say we might have ice cream later, you are essentially saying we are having ice cream. They don't hear the maybe part. And it turns out adults don't either. It's really interesting. There's something called reward prediction error, deeply in the context of the dopamine system. Dopamine, as I've said, is involved in anticipation of wanting, not of having. It's involved in motivation toward the thing that you want, and it biases us towards action. Reward prediction error equals the actual amount of dopamine that's released in response to something versus minus the amount that's expected. So if you tell a kid, we might have ice cream, they hear, we're going to have ice cream, and they expect it. And if you later say, well, we're not going to have ice cream, that's actually going to lead to a much bigger crash in dopamine. It's going to lead to a negative signal, a punishment signal. It's literally going to feel like pain. Now, adults are like this too. If we think something might happen, and it doesn't happen, there's a big crash in our affect, in our emotionality. And that's because that dopamine system goes from firing about 3 to 4 times per second to about 10 or 15 times per second in the possibility that something might happen. Possibility is deeply woven into our biology of the dopamine and motivation system as a way for us, presumably in ancient times, to explore novel territories and get a sense that maybe there's water there, maybe there's better food there, maybe there's resources there. The maybe is an important thing that in language terms, maybe means maybe. But in neurobiological terms, maybe means perhaps there's going to be the surprise of an even bigger dopamine reward. And the one thing dopamine loves more than anything else is surprise. When we get something positive, we go to the mailbox, we're expecting some bills, and you open it up and you get a letter from somebody you haven't thought about in a long time and you adore that person, that's a huge dopamine release. It actually triggers neuroplasticity. You probably never forget that because of the way that dopamine gates plasticity. When we get a surprise of something that we didn't want, also it creates plasticity. So the surprise, novelty, motivation, and reward, they're all woven into this package that we call dopamine. And the cool thing is you can actually regulate this whole system in a way, steer you or lean you towards more positive anticipation of things in life and less disappointment. It's simply a matter of adjusting what we call the dopamine schedule. So now let's talk about what is a dopamine schedule and how you can leverage this in order to have heightened levels of motivation, but not get so much dopamine that you're experiencing a crash afterwards, and also so that you can experience heightened pleasure from the various pursuits that you are engaged in life. And here's the key principle. Dopamine is very subjective, meaning you can either allow yourself to experience the pleasure of reaching a milestone, of achieving or some craving, or not. Now, that won't work in the extreme cases of drugs like cocaine and amphetamine, but it's actually pretty powerful what one can do with the subjective system. In fact, I'm going to describe to you an experiment that highlights just how powerful the subjective readout or the subjective interpretation of a given experience really can be, even at the level of pharmacology. The experiment was just published on March 18th, 2021, so very recently. What they did is they gave college students either placebo, essentially nothing, or 200 milligrams of caffeine. 200 milligrams of caffeine is about what's in typical coffee, like a medium coffee that you would buy, a drip coffee. It's a fair amount of caffeine. If you were to take it in pill form, it would definitely make you feel more alert, unless you were one of those mutants, literally mutants, that is insensitive to caffeine. And those mutants are pretty rare. So they took 65 undergraduate students in college. They randomized them to either placebo or caffeine, and they told them that they were either getting caffeine or Adderall. Now, Adderall cognitively carries a very different expectation. College students know Adderall to be a much stronger stimulant than caffeine. They know it to create a sort of high, and they thought that it would increase their level of focus and their ability to perform work. Definitely an effect of placebo versus caffeine. That's not surprising, however, right? You take a placebo, you may or may not feel more alert, but you take 200 milligrams of caffeine, very likely you're going to feel very alert. But the ones that expected Adderall reported stronger amphetamine effects, so they felt much more high. They performed better on a working memory test. And in general, they had all the increased cognitive effects that would have been seen with Adderall, but they were only ingesting caffeine. so it led to heightened performance simply because the students thought they were getting Adderall. Speaks to the fact that, yes, there are so-called placebo effects, but this is different than placebo. This is a belief effect about what the specific reactions to a given stimulant ought to be. And I think this is very important because I think that it points to the fact that the top-down, the kind of higher-level cognitive processes are impacting even the most basic fundamental aspects of, say, dopamine release or our adrenaline release or epinephrine release in ways that can positively impact performance. One of the things that you can do, as well as continue to enjoy the dopamine release that occurs when you hit the milestones that you want to achieve, is to occasionally remove rewards subjectively. Let's say you set out a certain financial goal, or let's say you want to get a certain number of followers on whatever social media platform. As you reach each one of those goals, you should know now that the amount of dopamine is not going to peak. It's actually going to diminish and make you crave more. The key to avoiding that crash, but to still keep it in healthy levels that will allow you to continue your pursuit, is as you are staircasing toward your goal. Maybe that's dollars, maybe that's followers, maybe that's grades, maybe that's some other metric, it's medals or trophies. You actually want to blunt the reward response for some of those intermediate goals. Now, I'm not telling you shouldn't celebrate your wins, but I'm telling you not to celebrate all of them.